On June the 2nd of 2023, 58-year-old Susan Loren called 911 to report her neighbor's children for allegedly trespassing and shouting outside her door in Ocala, Florida. According to other homeowners in the area, the woman had a history of taking action against 35-year-old Aduke Owens' children whenever they would step on her property. Loren would reportedly taunt them with racial slurs, threaten them with her guns, or call the police on them. Minutes after Loren had contacted the emergency line on June the 2nd, the operators received several other calls about gunshots in the area. In the moments that followed, Loren called 911 again to report that she'd shot a woman, subsequently identified as Owens, after she had allegedly attempted to break down her door. Owens was left in critical condition. She asked her son to call for an ambulance, and the young boy would subsequently tell the police that his mother had done nothing more than knock on the neighbor's door. Owens was taken to a local hospital where she later passed away from her gunshot injuries. Loren was arrested on June the 6th and charged with first-degree manslaughter, along with culpable negligence, battery, and 2 counts of assault. According to a statement released by the Marion County Sheriff's Office, she had shot Owens through her front door when the woman went to settle the dispute about her children playing near the 58-year-old's home. Loren claimed she'd acted in self-defense while fearful for her life and pleaded not guilty during her arraignment. Loren could not be charged with second-degree murder because the state found the preliminary evidence to be insufficient in proving that she had a depraved mind at the time of the shooting. The murder charges weren't, however, ruled out. And as of the latest updates on the matter, Loren's next court date was set for the fall of 2023. Number 6. Charles Robert Smith. The emergency services in Annapolis, Maryland, received a call about a car blocking 45-year-old Charles Robert Smith's driveway on Paddington Place on June the 11th of 2023. The man's mother, Shirley, had called to complain about multiple cars parked on the street due to her neighbor, 27-year-old Mario Antonio Mireles Ruiz, hosting a birthday party and having house guests. When Ruiz went to talk to Shirley about the situation, a heated argument erupted. Charles then returned home and confronted Ruiz, which triggered a physical altercation during the course of which the former brandished a handgun. Ruiz was shot dead as he and Charles struggled over control of the weapon. Charles also fatally shot Ruiz's friend, 25-year-old Christian Marlon Segovia. He subsequently retrieved the rifle and started firing upon those who'd gathered to help the downed men. In doing so, Charles shot and killed Ruiz's father, 55-year-old Nicholas Mireles, in addition to injuring several others. The authorities were called to the scene and officers found Charles at the front door of his house with his hands up when they arrived. The man surrendered without incident, was taken into custody, and held without bond. He claimed that he'd opened fire after someone had shot at his house, but witnesses disputed his version of events and denied seeing any of the victims with weapons on them. 2 firearms were recovered from the scene, a semi-automatic handgun and a rifle, but Charles didn't immediately confirm they belonged to him. According to court documents, the Smith and Ruiz families had a long history of being hostile to each other. During past conflicts, the Smiths were accused of using racial epithets against their neighbors on multiple occasions. By September of 2023, the indictment against Charles had 42 counts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of race or religious crime resulted in death, as well as multiple counts of assault and attempted murder. Jury selection for his trial was set for late spring of 2024. Number 5. Atore Lai. On April the 25th of 2023, William Martis was found dead in his driveway in Antioch Township, Illinois. It was suspected that the 59-year-old's death had involved his neighbor, Atore Lai, aged 79, who had a reputation for being hot-headed, started arguments and threatening people with his firearms. Law enforcement launched an investigation and witnesses claimed to have seen Lai and Martis arguing in the driveway. The former was arrested 2 weeks later, on April the 12th of 2023. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and held without bond in the county jail. Officers believed he'd shot Martis in the head while arguing over him using a leaf blower. The murder weapon was found near the 79-year-old's property line. The incident was reportedly not the first time Lai had pulled a gun on Martis. In August of 2023, After appearing for a hearing in Lake County Circuit Court, Lai was deemed mentally unfit for trial and remanded to the custody of the Illinois Department of Human Services. A psychologist report stated Lai had paranoid and delusional thought processes and that he believed he was being poisoned while being held in custody. According to the report, the man exhibited major impairment of neurocognitive functioning. Number 4. Robert Louis Singleter. On April the 18th of 2023, several children were playing basketball in a Crowder's Mountain neighborhood in Gastonia, North Carolina, when the ball accidentally rolled into one of the homeowners' yards. The children went to retrieve it, but they were met by 24-year-old Robert Louis Singleter, who was enraged and yelled at them to leave his property. According to his neighbors, Singleter was known to respond with aggression whenever people crossed into his property. After the basketball incident, one of the children complained to their father and he went to confront Singleter. The parent told him not to curse at his child and to talk to him if there was a problem. Singleter then briefly walked inside his home and returned holding a gun. He started randomly shooting at his neighbors, injuring a girl who was riding her bike and her parents who were outside grilling. The trio wasn't reported to have had anything to do with the basketball games. The shooter fled while the family was taken to the hospital. Police launched a manhunt and warned members of the public that Singleter was armed and dangerous. The girl received medical care for shrapnel that was lodged in her cheek, while her mother had had a bullet graze her elbow. The father had been shot in the back and needed hospitalization for his injury. Singleter was arrested on April the 20th after surrendering to the authorities in Hillsborough County, Florida. 10 days later, he was extradited back to North Carolina and booked into the Gaston County Jail. The man was indicted on 4 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, inflicting serious injury, and 1 count of possession of a firearm by a felon. Singleter had prior violent crimes on his record. In 2017, he was convicted for shooting 2 people in Mecklenburg County. He was imprisoned and released in 2020. He was also charged with assault and kidnapping in 2022 after allegedly attacking his girlfriend with a mini sledgehammer and keeping her in his apartment for 2 hours. Number 3. Alan Coe. On October the 25th of 2020, Matthew Choi, co-founder of Choi's Kimchi, was sleeping next to his girlfriend Jenny Kwan at his home in southeast Portland, Oregon. At around 2 a.m., Kwan woke up to the noise of the apartment door closing and, in the moments that followed, saw a shadowy figure moving from the hallway towards the bathroom. 33-year-old Choi was sleeping on a nearby sectional couch and Kwan woke him up, afraid that someone had broken into the home. She then grabbed her phone and yelled that she had called 911, thus attracting the intruder's attention. He rushed towards Kwan, who moved as far away from him as possible on the bed, at which point Choi grabbed him from behind. The intruder, who was wearing a face mask as well as a black t-shirt and sweatpants, then repeatedly stabbed Choi before fleeing the scene. The victim was rushed to the Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center, where he succumbed to his wounds. After reviewing the surveillance cameras and speaking to potential witnesses, police identified the suspect as Choi's neighbor, 30-year-old Alan Coe. A resident told the police that she'd seen him outside the building's call box just before 2 a.m. and that he'd gone inside the building. Another resident reported that Coe matched the description of the suspect released by the police. The investigation was ongoing when Coe was arrested in a separate case in Clackamas County about a week after the murder. On October the 31st, he stole an idling car in Milwaukee and was stopped by the police a short time later. Once in custody, Coe admitted that he'd killed Choi, claiming he'd been high on psychedelic drugs at the time. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and in March of 2022 was sentenced to at least 25 years in prison. In court, the man apologized for his actions and read a poem he'd written about his mental health issues, drug abuse and loneliness. Coe told the court that he was a man who'd lost his way, adding, "This failure as a human being is forever seared in my soul," hoping for forgiveness. The death of Choi had taken a heavy toll on Kwan and his family, particularly his mother, with whom he'd started Choi's Kimchi. They based the business on the woman's original kimchi recipe and grew the brand from a booth at Portland Farmers Market to a supermarket staple throughout the Northwest. Today's topic was requested by Paris Babe and Jim Krause 1975. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. plank wars. On the morning of January the 27th of 2019, British man Taran Stoko was awoken by the sound of neighbors fighting outside of his grandmother's home, where he had spent the night. He woke up to the window to see two men forcefully throwing planks of wood back and forth at each other over a fence. One of the men climbed the fence and tried to strike his neighbor before they both resumed hurling the planks. At one point, a woman intervened in the melee from the right side of the fence and launched a broom, which was subsequently thrown back. Stoko recorded the altercation and later posted the video on his social media, saying that he didn't need an alarm clock because of plank wars going off at 8 a.m. The footage went viral, rapidly gaining 7 million views. Commenters reacted to the clip with humor, as one user lauded the accuracy displayed by the neighbor on the right, while another wondered why both men had access to a seemingly endless supply of planks. One user quipped, "For any American viewers, don't be alarmed. This is just a tradition in England." The reason behind the fight and the identities of those involved remained unknown. Our video from a while back about when athletes go wrong is lined up for those of you who are longing for more of our content. Stay put if you'd like. Number 1. Francisco Oropeza. On April the 28th of 2023, Francisco Oropeza was firing an AR-style rifle in his yard in the rural town of Cleveland, about 45 miles north of Houston, Texas. Neighbor Wilson Garcia asked Oropeza to stop because his 1-month-old baby was trying to sleep. At around 11:30 p.m., Oropeza stormed into Garcia's home armed with the rifle and opened fire indiscriminately at everyone inside, killing 5 people. The victims, all of whom were from Honduras, were identified as Diana Velasquez Alvarado, Julissa Molina Rivera, Jose Jonathan Casares, Sonia Argentina Guzman, and Daniel Enrique Lasso. 39-year-old Oropeza then fled the scene, and the police subsequently launched a manhunt that came to involve drones, scent tracking dogs, more than 250 officers, and $80,000 in reward money being offered. After 4 days, Oropeza was found by Border Patrol agents in Conroe, about 20 miles from the scene of the shooting, hiding underneath a pile of laundry in a home. The investigation revealed the property belonged to his wife, 53-year-old Divimara Nava, who was arrested for helping him hide and lying to the police regarding her knowledge of his whereabouts. A friend of Oropeza's, Domingo Castilla, was at the scene, and he was arrested on drug charges and also investigated for his possible participation in Oropeza's flight from justice. Oropeza was charged with capital murder, to which he pleaded not guilty. According to his defense lawyers, there had been bad blood between him and the victims, with incidents that included one in which their dog had reportedly killed his chickens. Oropeza's legal representatives argued that he hadn't been merely asked to stop shooting his rifle, but that he was tormented and screamed at by one of the victims. Oropeza, a Mexican national who was almost deported 4 times over the span of 7 years, according to U.S. immigration, faced the death penalty if found guilty. His bond was set at $7.5 million, and his next court date was set for December of 2023. Number 5. Anthony D McClanahan. Anthony D McClanahan spent 3 years at Washington State University, playing as a linebacker during the early 1990s, before being drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, an NFL team for which he never made an official appearance. McClanahan did go on to spend 4 years in the Canadian Football League as a starter for the Calgary Stampeders. In the early morning of November the 2nd of 2017, McClanahan was found by police officers in Park City, a small city in Utah known for its many ski resorts. On that morning, McClanahan was crawling outside on his stomach while covered in blood. He managed to flag down 2 police officers who initially believed he had been the victim of a violent crime. That's also the version of events that McClanahan went with, as he told the officers that he, along with his wife and baby, had been attacked. McClanahan's injuries turned out to be somewhat minor, and his problem started when police did not find any evidence to back up his story of having been attacked. What they did find was his wife's body in the condominium that McClanahan had been renting a month prior to the grisly discovery. McClanahan had been arrested on charges of kidnapping his 8-year-old son from a previous relationship, then traveling with him for 9 days before returning him and bonding himself out of jail a few days later. McClanahan's wife, Kerry McClanahan, had already been planning on leaving McClanahan on account of him physically abusing her, a decision that was reinforced by the man's antics in October. Despite that, she had decided to try and help him get back on his feet first. It was a course of action that ultimately cost the woman her life. A jealous and bitter McClanahan ended up stabbing her to death in his apartment, enraged by Kerry's plan of leaving him. His attempts to plead his innocence or reduce guilt by pointing to other attackers, faking a seizure, and faking memory loss from having played professional football all failed. In 2019, he finally admitted his guilt and was sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Bruno Fernandez. In 2013, Bruno Fernandez was sentenced to 22 years in prison for the 2010 murder of his former mistress and the mother of his son, Elisa Samudio. The Brazilian goalkeeper, not to be confused with current Manchester United superstar midfielder Bruno Fernandez, had played for high-profile Brazilian club Flamengo between 2006 and 2010. During this time, he managed to win the National Club Championship in 2009. A year later, on June the 9th, during his last season with the club, his former mistress disappeared, shortly after having given birth to a son that she alleged was his, which Fernandez denied. Elisa Samudio went missing almost 8 months after she filed a police report against Fernandez and his longtime friend Luis Romao, nicknamed Spaghetti. In that report, she accused Fernandez, Spaghetti, and more of their friends of having kidnapped her and forced her to take medication to induce an abortion. They also allegedly beat her, and Fernandez was said to have pointed a gun at her head. When the forensic examination of the investigation was released in August of 2010, it was already too late. Samudio had disappeared at least 2 months prior. Investigations into that missing person case later found that Samudio had been lured into a trap. She and Fernandez had agreed to meet and discuss arrangements for child support, but instead she was picked up by Spaghetti and a cousin of Fernandez's who beat her up and kidnapped her. The cousin went on to confess that the victim was then handed off to Marcos Aparecido, a former policeman hired by Spaghetti to handle her killing. He did as instructed, and Samudio's body was never recovered. In 2013, Fernandez was found guilty of assassinating, kidnapping, and concealing the body of the 25-year-old woman, and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Subsequent events would unfold with remarkable leeway in how the soccer player served his punishment. In 2019, after having served less than half his sentence, Fernandez was released from prison to serve the remainder of his sentence under house arrest. The term house arrest was loosely applied, as Fernandez has since appeared in 13 games for Rio Branco, a team that plays in a lower, semi-professional Brazilian league. Number 3. Hope Solo. Goalkeeper Hope Solo was one of America's most famous and high-profile soccer stars, frequently ranked among the best American athletes overall, when she got arrested in the early morning of June the 24th of 2014. It was a turbulent arrest because an allegedly drunk Solo resisted police officers who were trying to take her into custody, calling one of them a bitch. She was also reported to have said, "You're scared of me because you know that if the handcuffs were off, I'd kick your ass." Teresa Robert, Solo's half-sister, and Roberts' son were the alleged victims in the domestic violence case against Solo. Initially, it had been Roberts' plan to convince prosecutors not to pursue charges. However, when Solo came out of jail and in an interview accused Roberts' 17-year-old son of being the aggressor, she changed her mind and wanted justice. According to her version of events, a drunk Solo had showed up at their house and had gotten worse over the next few hours before physically attacking her son. The son managed to restrain Solo and Robert told him to let go, which he did. Afterwards, Solo resumed her attack on the teenager, jumped on top of him, and started bashing his head into the cement floor inside their garage. When Robert came from behind to help her son, she managed to get Solo off, but the athlete then turned on her and started punching her in the face repeatedly. Solo appeared in court several times until after several delays in 2018, both cases of domestic violence were eventually dismissed. It was because the half-sister and her son decided they didn't want to be witnesses in the case anymore due to the toll that the case had taken on them throughout the years. Number 2. Tanya Hardin. On January the 6th of 1994, American figure skater Nancy Kerrigan had just completed a practice session at the Detroit Cobra Arena. She was hanging out in the corridors of the arena when, out of nowhere, she was hit on her leg with a 21-inch collapsible baton, the other end of which was held by Shane Stant. 8 days after the attack, which had been meant to destroy Kerrigan's kneecaps, Stant turned himself in and confessed to his crime. The attack later turned out to have been orchestrated by the ex-husband of Kerrigan's longtime rival, Tanya Hardin. Just before Christmas, a few weeks earlier, Stant had had a meeting with Jeff Gillooly, Hardin's ex-husband, and Sean Eckhart, Hardin's bodyguard. In that meeting, Gillooly and Eckhart offered Stant $6,500 to kneecap Kerrigan, to which he agreed. Even though the attack took place right before the American Figure Skating Championships, the end goal of it was to prevent Kerrigan from competing in the 1994 Winter Olympics. Kerrigan, who was hurt, bruised and battered, had to withdraw from the national championship, but recovered quickly enough to partake in the 1994 Olympics. She managed to secure second place, with Hardin finishing in 8th place. Later on, Hardin was directly linked to the attack and, in the aftermath, was stripped of her 1994 national championship title and banned for life. Stant was sentenced to 18 months in prison. His uncle, Derek Smith, who had connected him with Gillooly and Eckhart while also acting as the getaway driver, was, like his nephew, sentenced to 18 months. Jeff Gillooly was sentenced to 2 years after confessing, and Sean Eckhart was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Hardin herself worked out a deal with prosecutors that allowed her to plead guilty to lesser charges than having co-orchestrated the attack, which she'd been suspected of doing. She got 3 years of probation, a $100,000 fine, and 500 hours of community service. Her legal troubles were not completely over just yet. In the years after her guilty plea, Hardin was arrested twice more for driving under the influence. Number 1. Clayton Whitmore. In 2010, Clayton Whitmore helped his New Hartford High School Spartans capture a second straight Division II state championship. Shortly after clinching the division, Whitmore was even honored by the New York State High School Hockey Coaches Association as the state's Division II Player of the Year. He was considered a promising hockey star, and his future was looking bright. A mere 2 years later, Whitmore found himself in prison. He was accused of the murder of his 18-year-old girlfriend, Alexandra Kogut, who had been found dead in her dorm room at SUNY Brockport a few hours earlier, on September the 29th of 2012. Alexandra, like Whitmore, had been a promising young athlete, captaining her local swim team. When he was arrested at a thruway rest stop near Syracuse, Whitmore was 21 years old and playing hockey for Utica College. Kogut had been found with extensive trauma to the upper body. Whitmore initially denied the second-degree murder charge and having anything to do with her death at all. He was soon forced to change his story due to the overwhelming evidence against him. On the night that she was murdered, Kogut had tweeted about how excited she was to see Whitmore again. Her words started to have an ominous connotation, as in a subsequent tweet she wrote, "Should have known." An apparently ordinary argument about stupid stuff between the pair soon turned violent, and the two started shoving each other, according to Whitmore's version of events. In court, he declared that she kept pushing him, at which point he snapped and kept hitting her with his fists over and over again. He then testified that her breathing became irregular and she was starting to make gurgling sounds. Whitmore decided he did not want the girl he loved to suffer, and he grabbed a curling iron, which he used to end her life. In an attempt to get the murder charge downgraded to a manslaughter charge, Whitmore claimed that he had been physically and emotionally abused by his father growing up, something to which his sister testified. The jury would not be swayed, especially after it became clear that he'd been aggressive with some of his exes too. It took the jury under 2 hours to arrive at a guilty verdict, and Whitmore was sentenced to 25 to life. Thanks for watching. Would you rather live alone in a one-bedroom apartment or share your dream house with your psycho ex? Let us know in the comment section below.